This is Jen, the Liberty Lion. Welcome to my channel. You're new here, then I would like to take a moment to explain to you that many of my videos are linked with each other in the information that's conveyed. So I talk about a lot of different things, and all these different things are in one way or another dependent on knowing other things. So if you come here and you just pick out one video and listen to it, it might not make a whole lot of sense to you. So you have to sort of understand the underlying ideas. And the underlying idea is freedom, sovereignty, and liberty, truth, and the intention of the founders. The intention of the founders is not really conveyed today. So we've been propagandized to, indoctrinated, and so on and so forth to believe something that is the opposite of what we need to understand so that we can better equip ourselves with the information we need that will bring us to a place of freedom, sovereignty, liberty, independence. One of those things that we need to understand is the relationship between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, as well as the relationship between the independent states and the dependent states. So in this dictionary, a dictionary of law, containing definitions of the terms and phrases of American and English jurisprudence, I'm going to go over one phrase, and it's federal government. And when I explain this phrase, or when I read it to you, you may be a little bit confused, and that's because it's against what you've been told is true. But if you choose to understand and believe what this dictionary is explaining, and I'll help you by giving my 2 cents on it, then you can better understand the intention of the founders as far as the people being free, sovereign, and independent, and the states that they create being free, sovereign, and independent, versus the states created in the Constitution, the federal states being dependent states. This dictionary is by Black, published in 1891. And if you were to go to a law library, most of the books you would find on law are published by Black or West Publishing Company. So Black's is where we get a lot of our law, and West Publishing is who publishes them. So if you were to look this up on the internet, it's the 1891 Dictionary of Law by Henry Black, and you go to page 480, I believe it was about 480. We're going to go over what they say federal government means. Okay, I hope that you can see this. Federal government. The system of government administered in a state formed by the Union or confederation of several independent or quasi-independent states. Also, the composite state so formed. So I believe what it's saying here is that the Articles of Confederation were created first, and then from the Confederation, or inside the Confederation, was a type of union. And this type of union was a federal union. So the confederation with a federation had within it a union of states called a federation. That union of states was deficient according to the founders. So the portion of the Confederation that created the Union was deficient in some respects, in that it wasn't detailed enough to give the federal government the power to do the things that it needed to do. So when they did the Constitution, by all accounts, it appears to be, and the deputies were ordered to amend the Articles of Confederation to better explain and detail out the Union, and they did so by writing a constitution. So the Union, the Confederation, was formed by free, sovereign, and independent states, which it states so in the Articles of Confederation under, I believe it's Amendment 2. So these free, sovereign, and independent states formed the Confederation, and within it there was a federal union, to which was an agency to do certain things, and we'll see that in the other part of this definition, or in a better way to explain it to you, to act as an agent to do certain things. And we'll see what those things were here in a minute. So when it talks about the composite state, it's talking about the free, sovereign, and independent states, at least to my understanding, the free, sovereign, and independent states, which allowed for the Union to be created. So I understand the Constitution, and you understand the Constitution says, but no state within a state shall be erected. So how can there be a state within a state, but then no state within a state? So am I being contradictory? No, I'm not, because the Confederation allowed for the Union, and the Union was a state within a state. So when the Constitution was written, it said no more states within states, that will be the end of it, that there'll be a state within a state, and then after the Constitution, no more states within states. And we see that because the free, sovereign, and independent states were the composite states, which allowed a state built within it. That state built within it is called a dependent state. It has no sovereignty, and it comes under the Union. So it is a federal state. So you have independent states, which created the Confederation, which had a union in it, and that union was allowed to create dependent non-sovereign states, which are basically the federal lands inside the state. And those federal lands, they were to erect posts, such as forts, arsenals, dockyards, and needful buildings. Okay, so let's look at the rest of the definition. In strict usage, there is a distinction between a confederation and a federal government. So the Confederation, the Articles of Confederation, had a federal government within it. It just was deficient in power. So the Articles of Confederation were first, and it's an organic law, meaning that you can't have a federal government without first having a firm league of friendship between independent states. Because you can't have a federal government that creates dependent non-sovereign states unless it's given some way to be created or some place to be created, and those places are the Confederation or the free, sovereign, and independent states. It's sort of like the Confederation is the mom and pop, and the federal government are the children. According to the law of nations, you cannot have a nation without being able to defend it and the people. You have to be able to defend the lands and the people, and that's what the Constitution did. It created dependent states inside the independent states on federal lands, which are the military post, which is an agency under the Confederation working for the free, sovereign, and independent states. The former term, confederation, denotes a league or permanent alliance between several states, each of which is fully sovereign and independent. So you see, that's what I've been telling you. The Articles of Confederation are a firm league of friendship between free, sovereign, and independent states. And basically, independent, when used in this definition and this system, means sovereign. The federal government formed the dependent states, or the military areas, which have no sovereignty. They cannot cede from the Union, whereas the independent states can cede from the Union. So when the federal government says it's a permanent relationship and no state can cede from the Union, they're really talking about, because they're mincing words here, the dependent state that it created, because what you create, you control. So the independent states created the Confederation as well as the federal government, and then the federal government purchased lands within the states to create dependent states or military areas. Each of the states which is fully sovereign and independent, and each of which retains its full dignity, organization, and sovereignty through yielding to the central authority a controlling power, so just a very limited power, for a few limited purposes, such as external and diplomatic relations. So treaties, declarations of war, declaration of peace, and a few other things that may be listed in the Constitution, which is why we have ministers, consuls, and ambassadors, okay? Because they go to other countries, they work on relationships, they come up with treaties if they need to, and those are the external powers that the states yielded to the federal government in order to keep the peace. So we see that in the preamble of the Constitution, where it says tranquility, blessings of liberty, and general welfare. In this case, the component states, and I believe they mean the independent states, are the units with respect to the Confederation. So yes, the independent states are the component states under the Confederation, which retain full sovereignty and dignity, that yields only external powers to the federal government, and that these component states allowed for federal states to be erected inside of it for the building of military posts. And the central government acts upon them, not upon the individual citizens, which in many of my videos, to help people distinguish between this citizen and that citizen and a state citizen and a federal citizen, I usually use meaning the people who created the governments of the independent, free, and sovereign states. I call them settlers and inhabitants. This helps people understand that I'm talking about people not in government, who don't live on federal lands, who live within the independent state and under the independent state government. Today, most people have signed contracts with the federal government or its instrumentalities and are then brought in under the federal government by way of contract using our voluntary positive act, which is our signature, and therefore then come under the federal laws, which normally we would not be under the federal laws. If you're in Texas, you would be under the Republic of Texas. If you're in another state, you would be under the government, the original created government, the independent government of that state, not state of Texas, state of Virginia, state of Oklahoma, because that is the dependent state created by the federal government for military purposes. Of course, they've propagandized and indoctrinated and brought us in under those fictitious contracts and made us dependents or members of the federal government, where we're supposed to be members of our independent state governments. In a federal government, on the other hand, the allied states form a union, not indeed to such an extent as to destroy their separate organization or deprive them of quasi-sovereignty with respect to the administration of their purely local concerns, but so that the central power is erected into a true state or nation, possessing sovereignty both external and internal, while the administration of national affairs is directed to its effects felt not by the separate states deliberating as units, but by the people of all in their collective capacity as citizens of the nation. So the settlers and inhabitants who created the independent states are not really involved in the federal concerns. Their state governments may be involved in the federal concerns, but for the most part, the jurisdiction of the federal government within the Constitution is talking about the law or the right to make law on federal lands, and that the union, the federal government, acts as an agent which does, as I stated, promote freedom, sovereignty, liberty, justice, defense, tranquility, general welfare, and blessings of liberty. That's their job. Okay, so there's only very, very small amount of sovereignty given to the federal government, and that was originally done in the Articles of Confederation and then later reauthorized by amendment to the Articles of Confederation called a constitution. The distinction is expressed by the German writers because at one point in time, the Germans had a militarized central government, which over time changed into the same thing that we have now. So the Constitution, as I've said in many of my videos, appears to be a government setting up a military which is used as an agency to defend the country, which in turn promotes and ensures the safety, sovereignty, and liberty, independence, tranquility, etc. of the independent states. By German writers, by the use of the two words, Staatenbund or Bundesstaat. And I do not speak German, so if I mispronounce those, I apologize. The former, Staatenbund, denoting a league or confederation of states, so the Articles of Confederation. And the latter, a federal government, Bundesstaat, or state formed by means of a league or confederation. So I have gone over many different things recently that shows that the founders, according to the Federal Convention papers, were under orders to amend the Articles of Confederation, and what they came back with was a constitution, which was, or appears by all accounts to be, an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, because the federal system, the con with federation, which is just a suffix, allowed for the creation of the federal system. The federal system is already within the Articles of Confederation. It just needed to be expanded. The powers of it needed to be expanded. So what they've done over time is they've convinced us, propagandized to us, taught us in the school systems, indoctrinated us in colleges that the federal government is the central government. It's an all-powerful government which rules and controls all of our lives privately and publicly, and that it has the right to tax us and force us to register with it and all these other things, which is all a lie. Okay, because the states were and are and shall remain free, sovereign, and independent. Now, if you go back and look over I think it was a tech pub or military manual of some sort that goes over the methods of a military to use to make itself appear larger, or to win wars, basically. And one of the things that it did was to make itself appear larger, to force people into submitting to it or being afraid of it and giving up. And that's what the federal government has done. So the free, sovereign, and independent states under the Confederation created a union which has a military and is control of the military. And that union has tricked everyone into believing that it's bigger than it is and more powerful than it is, and that it is the controlling power over all of our lives in order to get us to submit to it. And for a second, when it looks like people are starting to look at it with, squinty eyes and be skeptical of it and its power, it does things to make us afraid, to get us busy, to take our minds off of it, to anything it can to get us back in line. Okay, so now we have all kinds of problems that we wouldn't have had they not tried to expand itself beyond its actual written power. People often say we need to return to the Constitution, when in reality, the federal government needs to return to the Constitution, as well as acknowledge the Articles of Confederation, which shows that the states are free, sovereign, and independent, and that the federal government has no power over the settlers and inhabitants of the state. And it has very, very small powers in relationship to the states, which is for administering external affairs and not to administer laws over the states, according to this definition. So there you have it. And if you have questions, please post them in the comments section. I try to answer any questions. I have tons of other videos going over all of this kind of stuff. There's federal papers which show you that the federal government, the deputies to the Federal Convention, never intended to create a new form of government. There is no repealing clause for the Articles of Confederation, and that in fact the Constitution, by all intents and purposes and by all appearances, is an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, which had already created a federal government within it. Okay, so there's a lot of things that they tell you these days that don't make sense, like you cannot have a federal government without first having a firm league of friendship between independent states. The way the documents are written, it just can't happen. There's no way, because someone has to administer the union, which is the agency, and that one that administers the agency are the states under the Articles of Confederation. Please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. I appreciate all your support. It's especially important to share to get the word out. and help people understand that they are free, sovereign, and independent. All we need to do is re-educate ourselves on the truth of our form of government.